Welcome to The Tax Factor, the top 20 business and investment podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Heather Self and Ellie Theochari.
Welcome to The Tax Factor. I'm Heather Self.
And I'm Ellie Theochari.
We're back indoors from our short relocation last week to the Blick Rothenberg Rose Garden as the weather seems to have become decidedly more autumnal. And it's another big milestone episode for us here at The Tax Factor. It's our 50th episode. We'll be looking back over those 50 episodes a little later in the programme. We've spent the last couple of weeks talking about the new Labour government and what we think is going to be in the budget. And I think it's time we probably turned our attention back to other things. Although, just to note that at yesterday's Treasury questions, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves confirmed that she's not going to increase the rate of corporation tax and also that we will see a business tax roadmap. I do think that's good news. I think for business tax purposes, what we're looking for is certainty. To be honest, a business often doesn't mind so much how much tax they've got to pay, provided they know and can plan for it and can build it into any quotations they're doing and so on. The other things that we have seen recently are one or two special pleadings in relation to VAT, the usual nonsense about let's have this specific product exempted from VAT. This time it's sunscreen. And the problem with taking one product out of VAT and zero rating it, whether it's tampons, e-books or anything else, is that customers generally don't see the benefit. The benefit tends to stay with the retailer. So the VAT goes down, but the price doesn't. And Ellie, we were having a chat earlier in the week. I think it surprised you when I said I think it would be better to put VAT on everything.
Yes, because it kind of hadn't even occurred to me really that when you're buying your food or baby clothes or things like that, we know there isn't any VAT on those. But actually, you don't really hear anybody saying that perhaps we should be putting VAT on everything. And I know that's probably not very palatable either from a political perspective to do that. But I guess I was very interested in your response more than anything.
The theory is that if you put VAT, for example, on all foodstuffs, apart from the fact that it will be probably political suicide when we look back to Osborne's omnishamble budget when all he was suggesting was putting VAT on takeaway pasties. So it would be a very difficult thing to do politically. But economically, you would find that more of the VAT would be collected from richer people because although people with lower incomes spend more of their income on zero-rated items like food and children's clothing and so on, the absolute amount spent by somebody on a higher income will be more. For example, just to take something very basic, somebody on a low income might choose the Tesco value pack of bacon at £2, whereas somebody on a higher income might buy the Marks and Spencer's super duper bacon at £4. So if you put VAT on both, you'll actually collect more from rich people. And that would let you reallocate the amounts collected onto improving benefits for people or perhaps bringing back the good old winter fuel allowance or doing anything that might help those on lower incomes. But as I say, I think it's unlikely, certainly in the short term and probably in the longer term, but it would take away a lot of the ridiculous VAT cases that we all love to talk about.
Absolutely. It wasn't that long ago when I was talking about the recent poppadom case. So it's endless, especially as you said, if you start looking particularly individual products, although yes, it can lead to the price going up for the consumer. Ultimately, someone will say sunscreen and then someone will say, oh, but what about my product? What about their product? What about my rival's product? And it will just never end.
So turning to something completely different, Ellie, I know your specialist subject is research and development, and I was interested to see a report that the lawyer Dan Needle put out a couple of weeks ago, highlighting what he says seems to be significant fraud on R&D claims. What's that all about?
So over the past 4 years, Dan, alongside, he works with quite a lot of specialists who choose not to be named, but actually in this case, he was working with some other R&D advisors who kind of chose to be named. They've been looking into a particular business who they believe have been submitting fraudulent claims for quite a long time, but particularly in the last 4 years, that's when their investigation has started. So what they have been able to ascertain really is that there is a whole web of companies that are all connected via various individuals and various companies all in the UK, where what will happen is some sales advisors who don't have any technical or accounting qualifications will cold call businesses, sometimes in sectors that you may expect expect to see R&D prevalent in, others not so much. For example, restaurants, care homes, physiotherapy, other kinds of therapy. So there was a named case about a business that had been able to make a claim for the creation of a garden that is very calming for people with dementia. As we know, R&D claims, in order for them to qualify, they need to meet both an advance in science or technology, and there needs to be scientific or technological uncertainty. So when we were looking through this report and we could see some of the examples that were coming out, it was plainly obvious, even to, I would actually say, to a non-technical professional, that these projects that were being claimed for simply did not qualify.
I had this example for one of my clients. I used to act for a client who was in the restaurant business, and they were approached by one of these R&D so-called claims experts, suggesting they could claim R&D credits on their new recipes. Now, there's no scientific or technological advance there. There's no real uncertainty that couldn't be solved in the normal course of business. It's a nonsense.
Absolutely. And I think when this all started really in about 2020, when HMRC really ramped up their compliance efforts, there was the peddled old example of the vegan blueberry muffin, the vegan croissant, the gluten-free pizza base, all this kind of thing. And there were a lot of us in the industry saying, we know that those are out there and we know people are making those claims because we hear about them, almost like they're a myth, really. But then seeing these really coming out of the woodwork. And as you said, Heather, lots of us over the years have been approached by businesses saying, we believe that we qualify because of XYZ. We have told them they haven't. Later down the line, we see their corporation tax return has been amended for a claim by another advisor who has said, yeah, it qualifies. And, it's not, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that HMRC didn't necessarily have their foot on the gas when concerns were being raised quite a long time ago. And the R&D tax credit scheme for a long time was seen by unscrupulous advisors as quite an easy way to make money because it was very much a pay now, check later kind of setup. But actually the check never really came. But now they are coming. Lots more of these examples are coming out. And this business in particular, it's estimated that there's potentially about £100 million worth of claims that have been submitted over the course of time, which of course for HMRC must be horrendous knowing that that's out there.
So it's a real health warning for our clients and any other businesses that if somebody approaches you with something that sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And the real risk is that you could end up paying fees to some unscrupulous business that then makes off with your money and you never actually get the tax back. Or worse, you get the tax back on day one, but a few years later you have to repay it with interest. On the real side of R&D though, what sort of businesses are you seeing that are really benefiting from claims?
So there's a whole range. And I think kind of going back to that report, some of the responses from the business in question had said there isn't a particular sector that this focuses on. And that is true. The R&D scheme for large companies, small companies is not limited to any one particular sector. Yes, what we do see in terms of the classic examples, pharmaceuticals, biochemistry, engineering, robotics, those kinds of sectors, they have really clear R&D most of the time. But software is the biggest sector for R&D claims. And, with the rise of AI and all of those kinds of innovative technologies that are out there, those are the kinds that we see. Certainly, if a business was to come to me in the restaurant industry or the care home industry, I would be seriously considering whether there is anything qualifying in those businesses.
Thanks very much for that, Ellie. Good to have an expert telling us how to do it properly. I think we're close to running out short of time. I just wanted to highlight one completely ridiculous tax case that I saw this week. It was someone who, would you believe, set up a snail farm in their office building. They had 15 crates of snails, and the reason for this was so it could qualify as an agricultural building and be exempt from business rates. Needless to say, it didn't work. Don't know whether they could have claimed R&D credits though. Perhaps they were very innovative snails. As this is our 50th episode, we thought we'd look back over a few of the stories we've covered.
The Tax Factor from Blick Rothenberg.
In short, I'll keep it tight. I think we're going to be in for a bumpy ride in 2024 on these non-dom changes.
Hot off the press this afternoon, HMRC has reversed its decision to close its self-assessment telephone helpline. On Tuesday, HMRC had said that the helpline would be closed between April and September, then reopening between October and March. And then during that time, taxpayers would be directed only to online services. However, less than 24 hours later, it said the helpline would actually stay open this summer.
So that's an amazingly quick U-turn. If they could answer the phones as quickly as that would be absolutely fantastic.
So here we are, the Great British Poppadom Quiz of 2024. This morning I went on Tesco.com and a sharing bag of Walker Sensations Poppadoms was advertised at £2.50 non-club card price. Assuming this includes standard rated VAT, what would be the price before VAT? A, £2 exactly, B, £2.08, or C, £2.13?
I'd say £2.08.
That is exactly right.
What should a tax reforming Chancellor actually do? So this is my wish list. Abolish the high income child benefit charge, where a family starts to lose their entitlement to child benefit when one of the couple earns more than 50,000. Remove the 100,000 cliff edge, where you start to lose your entitlement to tax-free childcare. Reinstate the personal allowance for everyone and remove that horrible 62% effective rate of tax on earnings between 100,000 and £125,140. Abolish the tapered 60,000 pensions annual allowance when you have adjusted income of more than 260,000. And most importantly, it's a horrible tax measure. Cancel the frozen tax allowances and enshrine in legislation that these will increase in line annually with inflation. But that's my wish list. I doubt I'm going to be that lucky. I expect another very defensive budget statement from the Sunak-Hunt regime.
Robert, politicians from our major political parties have been releasing their tax returns lately, which has garnered some interesting press comment. As is always the case, you can't necessarily believe what you read in the papers, can you?
Absolutely. There's been a lot of comments, some of it quite critical of the likes of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer.
This week we have a pension special. Yes, you heard it right. A whole tax factor dedicated to pensions. And I'm joined by pensions hero Martin Reynard, a senior manager at Blick Rothenberg, who spent all of his working life looking into the world of pensions, a subject which sends shivers down the spine of the most seasoned tax professional.
You'll all remember the Jaffa Cakes case. A Jaffa cake is a cake, not a biscuit, so that wasn't subject to VAT. But what about other biscuits? Robert, I think you're thinking about having a bourbon biscuit today?
I'm very much fancying a bourbon biscuit today, just as a matter of tax saving as much as anything. So basically, where the chocolate is integral to the biscuit, so it's covered wholly within the biscuit, it's a VAT exempt item. Whereas if you have the covering with chocolate or partially covering with chocolate, you then get caught by VAT, which is slightly quirky, I would suggest, from a kind of an overall perspective, because it's still just as tasty and delicious, but that's VAT law for you.
We should mark the 1-year anniversary of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's ill-fated mini-budget, which was the beginning of the end. Kwarteng's 38 days in office has the distinction of being the second shortest-serving Chancellor in British history, only surpassed by Ian MacLeod, who lasted 30 days in 1970 before sadly dying from a heart attack. Whilst Truss would outlast Kwarteng by 11 days, she would take the unfortunate accolade of being the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister. So, Matt, take us back to this time last year. And what was your take on it at the time?
It really was an unexpectedly brutal kind of slash and burn of many of Rishi Sunak's key policies from when he was Chancellor.
I think a lot of the time the politicians here are like fiddling whilst Rome burns from a tax perspective. It would be great if they kind of took a step back and said, okay, what should the wider tax system look like? What are the appropriate bans? What about things like the child benefit clawback? Where should it apply? Should it apply at all? And all of that. And I think they're fiddling at the moment, and all we're going to see is more fiddling come the autumn statement, unfortunately.
If you're thinking of selling that unwanted Christmas jumper, then there are new rules coming in from January giving HMRC access to seller information from digital platforms such as eBay, Vinted, Vestia, Collective, Etsy, etc. I personally know loads of people who've started selling now kind of unloved and unused clothes through these platforms as they look to declutter and earn a bit of extra cash, especially at this time of year. HMRC certainly seem to be keen to find out about the levels of income people are generating and what income might be going untaxed.
If you take just one example, though, children's clothing, that's been zero-rated ever was introduced. Any chancellor who suggested removing that would get absolutely murdered by the media. Just think of George Osborne and the pasty tax multiplied by a factor of about 1,000. And yet that delivers a subsidy to wealthy people buying expensive children's clothes and does very little to help people who are really struggling to provide school uniforms for their kids. Much better, actually, to abolish the zero rating, make the system simpler, and use some of the money that raises to support the people who really need it.
I was hoping the production team had splashed out on cake, but no such luck.
We've already had a blah, 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 blah. Start that bit again.
No, I think that was good. I like that.
The last tax factor... Oh, shut up. Stop laughing.
That's the tax factor.
So that's all we have time for this week. We're off to the Tax Factor birthday party down the corridor. As accountants, of course, we only buy snacks which are zero rated for VAT purposes. Just as a reminder, we release the podcast every Friday on the Blick Rothenberg website and all the usual podcast platforms as well, so you can listen wherever is most convenient. We record and release them in less than 24 hours, so you always get the very latest news and updates. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating or review.
If there is any subject you would like us to cover, you can contact contact us via the Tax Factor page on the Blick Rothenberg website. We're sorry, but we can't give individual advice, but we're always keen to hear what you would like to hear about.
Until next week, goodbye and have a good weekend.
We'd like to thank you for making us one of the UK's top 20 podcasts. Find all our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again next time on The Tax Factor.